welcome to the colloquium, everyone, for my bachelor thesis. And as you can see, the topic of my bachelor thesis is about Cairo, Egypt. So the title is The Significance of Fortress Babylon, Cairo on the Governance of Roman Egypt. So before I start, just one small question. Is it okay if this presentation is being filmed? Yeah, okay, good, great. So this is the structure of my thesis basically. So it has 5 chapters. So the first chapter is about a brief introduction to Roman Egypt. So basically in this chapter, I will talk about why is Egypt so important for the Roman Empire. In the second part, I will talk about the fortress Babylon itself, about the architecture, some archaeological evidences and stuff like that. And then the third part, we will take a look at the functionalities of fortress Babylon. So we will try to see how important this fortress is to the Romans, stabilizing their control in Egypt. And the fourth one is a bit slightly outside of our topic, but I do want to talk a bit about, so what's the influence of this fortress on the future development of Cairo as the Egyptian capital? And finally, we will go to the conclusion. So yes, now we go to the first part, a brief introduction to the Roman Egypt. So the history of Roman Egypt starts in 30 BC, following the Roman conquest of Egypt and the overthrow of the Ptolemy dynasty in Egypt. And it has been ever since a Roman province up until the year 641, when the Arabs conquered Egypt. And throughout this time period, aside from being briefly occupied by the Sassanid Persians between 619 to 628, Egypt has been staying firmly under the Roman control. So a bit about the geography. So this here is a map of Egypt during the Roman Empire, specifically during the age of Trajan. So as you can see, the map of Roman Egypt, the boundaries, geographic boundaries, is more or less similar to modern day Egypt, except for 2 parts. So first of all, the Western Desert, which is not part of the Roman Empire, and Sinai, which is part of Arabian back then. And Egypt itself could be traditionally divided into 2 parts. So the northern part would be Lower Egypt, with most notably the Nile Delta, and the southern part would be the Upper Egypt. So yeah, now we're going to talk a little bit about the economy and society of Roman Egypt. So there are 4 significances of Egypt to the Roman Empire. So first of all, it's the biggest, well, one of the biggest at least, grain provider for the Roman Empire. And second of all, Egypt was the largest contributor of tax for the Roman Empire. And third and fourth is a bit similar, but yeah, so it's an intellectual and religious center for the Roman Empire. So yeah, as we know, grains, wheat, for example, they're the most important source of food for the ancient Mediterranean. And therefore, as Flavius Josephus once wrote, so Africa fed Rome for 2/3 of the year, while Egypt fed for the remaining 1/3 of the year. So here Africa means North Africa outside of Egypt. And so the traditional provider of grains for the Roman Empire would be Sicily and Sardinia. But following the conquest of Rome of North Africa, Africa gradually replaced Sardinia and Sicily as the main grain provider. And as we can see from this data here, so the annual Egyptian grain export to Rome under Augustus, which is the beginning of the empire, is around 20 million modi, but up until Justinian, which is already late antiquity, after the fall of the Western Empire, it has reached to already 36 million modi. And to demonstrate the importance of grain shipments from Egypt to the Roman Empire, the shipment of grain from Egypt is actually organized in the form of fleets, classes, so military fleets. And this fleet is under the supervision of an imperial procurator stationed in Alexandria. So basically, the shipment of grain from Egypt to Rome is a very highly imperial organized activity. And yeah, aside from providing, well, more likely feeding the empire itself, Egypt also provides a lot of economic contributions to the empire. So yeah, basically Egypt pays more tax than any part of the empire. And actually, as we mentioned earlier, the grain shipment is very important for empire. And therefore it's understandable that the raise, like the change of grain taxes is a power that lays solely on the emperor himself. And of course, grain tax is not the only kind of tax that's been collected in Egypt. So of course, various other forms of taxes existed. And here I would actually specifically talk about the customs tariff here, because it's a very important source of income for Egypt, in Rome first of all, because as we know, Egypt is located in between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, and therefore it functions as the transit between the trade between East and West. And also since I will talk about customs tariff in the third chapter as well, so I think it's good that we know a bit about it first. So the customs tariffs in Roman Egypt can be divided into two forms. So the first form is called external customs tariff. So basically that's import tax. So let's say if you import something from Rome to Egypt, you pay a tax, which is very high, around 25%. And there's also another form of tax called, like customs tariffs, called internal customs tariffs. So basically it means if you want to move your imported goods from one part of Egypt to the other, then you need to pay again some taxes. And this tax can, well, it's a bit lower, around 2 to 3%, depending on which place you are. So there are about the external customs tariffs. So there are external customs districts to charge these taxes, which there are 4. So the first one will be Alexandria and the Mediterranean coast, the northern border. Another one in the western desert, so that's the western border. Another one in Aswan, southern border. And the last one would be on the Red Sea coast. So I mean, here I'm showing just Berenike, but there are other Red Sea ports where you can also charge this kind of taxes as well. Yes.
Woher kommen diese Quellen, also auch diese Prozentangaben?
Also durch
Ich das auf Englisch machen.
Okay, well, research papers. So yeah, books.
Ja, das ist schon klar. Aber jetzt, das muss ja antike Quellen geben, oder? Sind das Inschriften oder sind das Papyri? Wo kommt das her? Und das müssen Sie schon auch in der Arbeit auch belegen.
Okay. Well, I can look for like direct sources because these are like research papers which quoted from ancient sources.
Ja,
so
dann immer zurück an die Quelle. Ja.
Okay, got it. Yes. And okay, and yeah, and then about the internal customs districts, there are again 4 of them. So starting from north, the Nile Delta, then around Memphis, Thebes, and one of the access points from the Nile to the Red Sea. So it could be Edfu, Coptos, somewhere, depends. So yeah, so basically, if you want to import something from, let's say, Rome to India, and you pass through Egypt, what will happen is, so first of all, you pay the external tax at Alexandria, then you pay once the internal tax, customs tariffs at the Nile Delta, then Memphis, Thebes, and at last you pay once more at, here is Edfu, and yeah, then you're clear for export. So the point of this example is to demonstrate just how much tax, customs tariffs, Rome could extract from a very simple cargo import into Egypt from Egypt to India, and yeah, and also later we'll see that actually Babylon would play a role in this process as well. And also here, also it's worth mentioning that, well, I don't know how to say that in Greek, but well, this is also a name of certain customs tariffs, which means the tax for protection of desert route. And in this sense, so actually infrastructure building and fortification within the province is actually, like what I mean is there's actually economic motivation behind it, because so the more fortified this province is, the more infrastructure there is, the more rights the Roman government has to levy tax. So in a way, fortifications like Babylon itself is already a very good economical investment. So, and yeah, the capital of Roman Egypt, Alexandria, is an intellectual center for the whole Eastern Mediterranean since the Hellenistic times. And this is, of course, largely thanks to all of these institutions in Alexandria. For example, the Great Library of Alexandria, the museum, which includes the museum, and of course the Library of Serapeum, which is perhaps the first public library in the world. And also, thanks to these institutes, we have very famous academical figures living in Alexandria back then. For example, Claudius Ptolemy, he is the creator of Geographia, which first of all mapped out the known existing world and also introduced the grid system. So that's his major contribution. And there's also this, well, a lot of people would argue that Alexandria, after Christianization, suffered a cultural decline in the late antiquities. But this is actually more or less a biased opinion, because as you can see here through archaeological evidences, it's not the case. So in Alexandria, there's the Roman theater, and next to the theater, there's this building called the Auditoria. And, well, this is the introduction of the Auditoria. So yeah, this Auditoria was in use between 5th to 7th century, which is exactly the amount of time during the late antiquity. And it functioned as an educational facility because it consisted of lecture halls here and there. And its gigantic size is a very good indication that it actually hosted a very large amount of students. So in this case, well, despite the Christianization and all the other facts, Alexandria itself, along with Egypt, remained as an intellectual center all the way to the end of Roman rule in Egypt. And yes, it's also a religious center for the empire. So, well, actually both before and after Christianization. So before Christianization, as we know, Egypt has a very splendid ancient religion, and this religion is being acknowledged by a Roman Empire as well. So this is the reason why in Alexandria, the Roman government set up this figure called the Archiereus. So he is in charge of managing all the temples and religious structures in Egypt. And also, Roman emperors are very active in sponsoring Egyptian temples since Tiberius. So for example, as we can see, Trajan himself sponsored all these temples, and most importantly, the one at Philae, which is still one of the most famous ancient Egyptian temples. And so this sponsorship created a mutual influence. So on the one hand, Roman culture had a very profound influence on Egyptian religion. So for example, if we, at the temple of Philae, we will see Emperor Trajan being depicted as an Egyptian pharaoh. And in Alexandria, in the catacombs, so the graves, crypts, we will see the Egyptian god Anubis being depicted as a Roman infantryman. But however, the Egyptian influence on Roman religions is actually even more profound, because at the center of Campus Martius in Rome, we will find the temple of Isis and Serapis. So Isis, we know, is a local Egyptian goddess, and Serapis is a Greco-Roman god that came into being during the Ptolemaic times. And also in Hadrian's Villa in Tivoli, we will see this structure called the Canopy and Serapeum, which is again dedicated to the Egyptian god Serapis. And more impressively, even on Roman coins, we will see depiction of the Egyptian god Serapis. So, yeah, before Christianization, Egyptian religion already had a very profound influence on Rome. And even after Christianization, Egypt is still having a very, very important influence on Rome and actually the whole Mediterranean world. Because, well, of course, the tradition of Egyptian Christianity started already back in the first century when St. Mark introduced Christianity into Egypt. And later, after Christianization of the empire, it became one of the pentarchies of the empire. So the other four would be Rome, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Carthage. So that goes to show how important the city of Alexandria is. And of course, Alexandria is also the home to many influential theologians, for example, Titus Flavius Clemens, Origen's Admapdatius, and St. Anthony the Great. And due to this very strong Christian theological tradition in Alexandria, it gave rise to Arianism, which is a very important branch of early Christianity. And the rise of Arianism led, in the end, to the formation of various Arian Germanic kingdoms. So, for example, the Ostrogothic kingdom, the Vestrogothic kingdom, Vandalic kingdom, and so on. And as we know, all of these kingdoms eventually played a very important role in the late antiquity and the fall of Western Roman Empire. So, in a way, the religious influence of Egypt eventually shaped the geopolitical situation of the late antiquity, and some of the influences we can still feel today. And yeah, about the population of Egypt, so it's hard to get an exact estimation of the population. So we have series that says 5 million, series that says 77.5 million. But what we would all agree on is a large percent of this population is concentrated in Alexandria, which makes Alexandria at a certain point the second largest city in the Roman Empire. And also what's worth noticing is that maybe Egypt does not have the highest number of population, but it does have the highest population density. So as you can see here, 167, and the second would be Italy, it's 45. So yeah, well, in my opinion, this large population density shows the prosperity of Egypt, so especially in terms of agriculture and economics. So yeah. And so yeah, the summary of this chapter would be that Egypt is first of all a cultural religious center for the Roman Empire and the Mediterranean in general, and also it's one of the most important grain providers for the empire, which means the Roman control of Egypt has a direct influence on the stability and survival of the empire. And also, as mentioned, Egypt generates an immense amount of wealth and convenience for the empire, and also provide a convenient geographical location for trading, especially between the Mediterranean and the Orient. So yeah, it also plays a significant impact on the political and economical stability of the empire, which means the safeguard of Egypt will always be a priority for the Roman emperors. And in this case, we go to the second chapter about the fortress Babylon itself. So the main question that I'm trying to answer in this thesis is, what role did Fortress Babylon play in the effective rule of Roman Egypt? Because as we know, Rome has been stably controlling Egypt for 600 years. So yeah, there has to be a reason behind it. But of course, before we examine everything that I will present, we need to keep in mind 2 points. So first of all, the importance of Alexandria as a provincial capital should never be, it cannot be replaced. So, because as we will see, in most cases, the fall of Alexandria would mean the fall of Roman Egypt. So, yeah, the point here is no matter how important Babylon is, its existence functioned as a means to protect Alexandria itself. And second of all, Rome has a very large network of fortresses in Egypt, and the defense of Roman Egypt relies not just on the fortress Babylon itself, no matter how important it is. It's in the end a part of an integral defense system. So yeah, we should know that the defense of Roman Egypt lies not solely on fortress Babylon. So yeah, about the fortress, I would like to first talk about its geography and its pharaonic locations. So the fortress itself is located in the city of Cairo, modern days, in the southern part, of course. It's not directly next to the Nile, but it's only a few hundred meters to the eastern bank. And right across the fortress, across the Nile, would be the city of Giza, where the famous pyramids are located. And the modern center of Egypt, which is the Al Tahrir Square, is around 5 kilometers to the north. And if we take a look at the vast map of the Nile Delta, we'll see that Babylon is actually located only 20 kilometers away from the ancient capital of Memphis. And to the northwest, we have Alexandria, which is around 225 kilometers away. And to the northeast is the city of Pelusium, which is around 215 kilometers away. So Pelusium is located on the eastern end of the delta and is traditionally considered as the gateway to Egypt. And it's very close to the modern-day city of Port Said, which is the northern entrance to the Suez Canal. And also, Babylon is connected actually to the Red Sea via this canal, which is called the Trajan's Canal. And this we will also talk about a lot in the later part of the presentation. So yeah, basically, Babylon controls the conjunction point between Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt, as well as the access point, one of the access points from the Nile to the Red Sea. So, just like many great cities, Constantinople, Rome, Alexandria, Babylon was not built on scratch. So this place has been settled all the way since the pharaonic times. So Babylon is very close to Heliopolis, which was the main coast center for the Egyptian sun god Ra. The distance of Heliopolis is around 18 kilometers away from the fortress. So since Heliopolis is a very important city, but it's not directly next to the Nile. So which means the importance of Heliopolis requires actually an access to the Nile. And this access to the Nile comes in the form of a port enclave called Keaha, which is located exactly where modern Babylon is. So yeah, the town of Keaha is part of Heliopolis' extensive territory, and it is actually connected by a canal and a well-maintained road. So yeah, this whole area is pretty well connected, providing very good transportation conditions. And yeah, so, well, of course, Keaha did not function just as a port city, basically. It's also a very important coast center in ancient Egypt. And this could be testified from this artifact here, which is called the Victory Stela of Bikanhi. So on this stela, it basically described a divine procession that happened in between Memphis and Heliopolis, the capital and the coast center. And during this process at Keaha, the pharaoh actually offered to the sun god Amun. So this is one indication that we have that Keaha is an important coast center. And secondly, in ancient Egyptian mythology, Keaha also played a significant role because there was a duel between the god Horus, which is him, and the god Ses, which is him, his uncle, by the way. So in this epic battle that happened between these two gods, Horus lost an eye, and the eye was eventually found in Heliopolis. But the battle itself took place in Keaha, which apparently meant place of combat in ancient Egyptian language. And also, at this place, Stos, which is this god, he mediated the peace between Horus and Ses. So that also also in legend, this place has a quite important role, actually. And here is just a personal opinion. I think the fact that Keaha played such an important role in ancient Egyptian religion is actually not a coincidence, because as we can see here, this city is located exactly at the conjunction between Upper and Lower Egypt, and which ancient Egypt consists of both. So like the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, they're usually called the pharaoh of both Upper and Lower Egypt. And also, this site, Keaha, is pretty close to the eastern bank of the Nile. And since we know that the Nile is considered as the source of life, and especially the eastern bank is considered as the land of the living. That's why most of the great Egyptian cities, for example, if you go to Luxor, you will notice that the city itself is located on the eastern bank, while the necropolis, for example, the Valley of the Kings, a lot like the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, they will be located on the western side. So yeah, these two factors actually, I would say, contributed to the fact that the ancient Egyptians deliberately chose this place as the battlefield of this epic battle between the two gods. So yeah, well, back to the city itself. So the city of Keaha actually has two centers. So because the ancient settlement of Keaha is actually located on an elevated hill, not directly next to Nile. So basically, well, the city itself consists of two districts. So the first one is the settlement of Keaha, which is located on a hill, and then there's also a river village which functions as a port, and this village's name is called Peapi, and it's around 2 kilometers away from the settlement itself. So these two places, they were separated, but through the course of time, they merged into one settlement. So yeah, and these two places, actually together lay the foundation of Roman Babylon, as we will see later. And so, as we know, Babylon is a city in Mesopotamia, and Egypt is very far away from Mesopotamia. So the question is, how come this place is called Babylon? So there are several theories about how Babylon got its name, but all of them point to Persian or Mesopotamian origin. So the first theory is mentioned that this settlement, Babylon, was founded by Persian or Mesopotamian kings. So according to Josephus, it's founded by the Persian king Cambyses, and according to John of Nicaea, which is a historian in the 7th century, the city is founded by Nebuchadnezzar, which is the Neo-Babylonian king. And there is a certain credibility to this theory, because the last references to the name Keaha cease between the end of 7th century and the beginning of 6th century, which actually corresponds to the time period of Cambyses and Nebuchadnezzar. And the other theory goes to state that the name Babylon actually came from the Babylonian people. So according to Diodorus Siculus, the fortress or the settlement of Babylon was founded by Babylonian captives who revolted during the reign of Pharaoh Sosostris, which is actually way earlier in history. And according to Strabo, he didn't state about the details, but he did mention that this fortress was founded by Babylonian refugees in Egypt. So either ways, so Babylon as a military fortress, it dates, the history of it being used as a military fortress actually dates way before the Roman Empire, which means the strategic potential of this location has been long recognized by various rulers who occupy Egypt, doesn't matter if it's ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, or Persians. And also, what we're seeing here is a gradual shift of role of Keaha or Babylon. So it starts to turn from a mainly religious role as a coast center to a mainly secular role as a military fortress. So now we come to the Roman era. So the fortress Babylon went through 3 major development phases under the Roman Empire, which happened during the reign of Augustus, Trajan, and Diocletian respectively. So the first phase was the Augustan phase. So at this point, Babylon was being founded as a legionary camp by Augustus. So it housed the legion, the 3rd Legion Cyrenaica, which was one of the 3 legions that was stationed in Egypt during the age of Augustus. The other 2 legions, one is the 22nd Diotriana, which is stationed near Alexandria. And the other one, well, it's unknown to us, unfortunately, but it's indicated as probably stationed near Thebes. So this deployment actually demonstrated the importance of Babylon all the way from the beginning of the Roman Empire, because back then Babylon is still a pretty small settlement, but somehow it was risen to a similar status to metropolis, which is Alexandria and Thebes. So Thebes was apparently one of the ancient Egyptian capitals. So yeah, yes.
How's the name Babylon connected to the place? Are there inscriptions or something like that?
Well, so far from my materials, it's mainly from historical texts from the previous 4 authors. They're all they all lived during the Roman era, so yeah. Inscriptions, I haven't found any so far.
Gibt's auch nicht.
So, yeah.
Also das ist überhaupt die ganzen Legionen in Ägypten, gerade unter Augustus, sind sehr umstritten. Also man kennt es nur von den Schriftquellen her, dass diese da waren, aber wo die genau saßen, das wissen wir eigentlich gar nicht. Also Herr Müller hat sich ja mal mit den Legionen in der Zeit Augustus beschäftigt, ne? Wie schwierig das eigentlich ist.
Also wobei Strabo erwähnt schon, dass die 3. und die 22. sind schon einigermaßen
Die sind in Ägypten, ja, aber wo genau, das steht dann, glaube ich, auch wieder nicht da.
Also die kann man einigermaßen gut fassen, aber auch also mit den Lagern. Das ist nur die vermeintliche 12., die zwischendurch mal da auch nach Ägypten gelegt wurde, die ist komplett hypothetisch.
Aber das heißt, woher genau kommt dann diese Zuweisung zu Babylon? Gibt es da Schriftquellen, die quasi Babylon als Legionsstandort nennen?
Ja, Strabo.
that's exactly what they mentioned earlier. Yeah. And yeah, so well, of course, due to the lack of materials, so the exact location of this legionary camp is actually quite debated. So we have Strabo, who suggested that it's actually located on the elevated grounds of Keaha, so like the Egyptian settlement, basically. And his credibility lies in the fact that he was a contemporary of Augustus, so 1st century AD. And then we have another theory which is suggested by the French archaeologist Jean Lesquier. So he thinks that the legionary fortress is actually located on the flooded plains of Pehapi, so more closer to the modern day site of Babylon. And his credibility lies in the fact that he had done some brief archaeological surveys around the current fortress site. But yeah, as we know, the current fortress site is part of the old Cairo already, so he actually couldn't do that much of detailed survey. But so since in this debate situation, again, my personal opinion, I would say that the legionary site is more likely to be located on an elevated highway, at high place, as what Strabo would suggest, because well, apparently an elevated position would provide a strong defensive position and, more importantly, protect the site from floodings of the Nile, because the area of Pehapi is located directly in the flooding zone of the Nile, which makes it kind of pointless to build a legionary camp there. And also, the settlement of Keaha is already in close proximity to roads and canal networks. So yeah, it's a pretty good site for transportation. And also, the Romans have a tradition of converting existing structures into their own use. As we will see later, the Romans did the same thing in Egypt to several temples. They converted temples into legionary fortresses. So yeah, it's also pragmatic for Romans to reuse the existing site of the Egyptian fortress to make it into their own legionary camp. So yeah, then we come to the age of Trajan, which is the second major development phase. So during the age of Trajan, what he did was he constructed the Trajan's Canal, which is called Amnius Traianus in Latin. And this canal connected the Nile and the Red Sea, and the connecting point is directly at Babylon. And of course, at the same time, he also constructed a harbor at Babylon, so at the mouth of Trajan's Canal. And this harbor formed the center of the later Diocletian fortress, and we will see archaeological evidence about this harbor very soon. So again, this canal was not carved out of the blue, so there was something before already. So, and the predecessor to Trajan's Canal is what we call the Darius Canal, which was constructed during the Persian occupation of Egypt. And we know about this canal because of this stela. Well, actually, that's a set of stelas found in various places alongside this canal, which indicate the existence of a canal during the Persian rule. So this canal, it starts from here on the Nile, and it passes by this place which is called Wadi Timlat. So this is a dried, well, in most of the time it's a dried riverbed basically, but in the very ancient times it used to function as a branch of the Nile. And then it goes through Lake Timash, down to the Bitter Lake, and then at the end it reaches this port, Clisma, which is very close to the modern day port of Suez, so the southern end of the Suez Canal. And well, this canal, it has largely gone out of use by the age of Roman conquest. So in order to reconnect the Red Sea with the Nile, the necessity of Trajan's Canal appeared. So, but of course, why did Trajan chose a new site of Babylon instead of just reusing the ancient site? Well, actually, he once again took advantage of an existing structure, which is called the Gigi Canal. So this is a very small local canal, which connected mostly Memphis and Heliopolis, but it extends a bit north to this town called Tel Yehudia. And the reason why it extends to this town was because back in the days, this town used to be the starting point of another branch of the Nile. So basically, Trajan's what Trajan did in his project was, well, first of all, he improved the existing port facilities around Babylon, which is due to the construction of the Jish Canal. And second of all, he connected these two canals together. So then by doing so, he formed the integrate Trajan's Canal from Babylon to the Red Sea. And the canal itself was constructed in the year 107, but there's a historical background to it. So just 1 year before the construction of the canal, Trajan annexed Nabatea, which is located in modern-day Jordan. And 4 years after the construction of the canal, he opened up the road via Nova Traiana, which connected Aqaba with Damascus. So, and then shortly 4 years after the opening of this road, what happened was the Trajans' campaign against Parthia. So these four things, well, they should be seen together as a part of a complete process. And so if we look at it this way, then the purpose of the Trajans' Canal is actually not just opening a new canal, but it lies the fact that Trajan wanted to better connect the whole of Eastern Empire to strengthen the border and defend against Parthia. And also, of course, there's also motivation of him wanting to improve the trading situation with India, because the traditional caravan road in the Mesopotamia region is now under threat by Parthia. Well, actually, the Parthian capital Ctesiphon is located directly in the Mesopotamia region. So this trading route would have been a bit problematic for Romans. And also, there's a theory that suggests Trajan probably had the idea of attacking Parthia from the sea, well, which actually never happened, but could be. So yeah, this Trajan's harbor and the canal, we can find them through actually archaeological evidences. So here we can see a blueprint of the Babylon fortress and modern day Cairo. Well, okay, the resolution is not so good on the laptop, but yeah. So so as you can see, there are 4 dark parts, and these 4 dark parts indicate the presence of the Trajan's harbor. So basically, we have these 3 parts. They're located alongside the Nile. 2 of them are located at the entrance of the canal, and 1, yeah, it's just alongside the Nile. And then we have this part, which is a wall of the canal. And yeah, again, it's located inside the fortress. So yeah, here's photos of the archaeological evidences. And so here we have mooring stones, which means you can tie a ship onto it. And this is located at the northern round tower of the future fortress. And then here, part of the walls next to the southern round tower is the wall of the canal. And then here, underneath, it's at the south gate of the fortress, and underneath the tower, there's some stairs that leads to the canal itself. And here, about the canal wall, it's actually underground of this one church called Abu Serga. And yeah, unfortunately nowadays it's not accessible. So, as I mentioned earlier, the canal and the harbor laid a solid foundation for the later fortress during the Diocletian times. And this we can actually see from photos. So here, this is the northern round tower, here, which is still standing today. And here we have the southern gate, along with the steps to the harbor, seen here. So yeah. Now at this phase, we can forget about the legionary camp, and the center of Babylon has shifted back to the Nile, alongside the Nile, which is the current site we're seeing today. So now we go to the age of Diocletian. So, we know Diocletian was the first emperor to come out of the 3rd century crisis. So he started the era of Tetrarchy, which is a very unstable period where Rome is still under external and internal threats. So under this historical background, there's actually a very high demand for military protection. And what we see here is Emperor Diocletian actually began a very massive project of fortifying the whole Roman frontier, including the Egyptian frontier. So in Egypt, he constructed a series of fortresses. For example, Luxor. He converted the temple of Luxor into a Roman fortress. Then he created this other gigantic fortress. It's called Nag el-Hagar, which is near Aswan, modern day Aswan. So yeah, Babylon was actually a part of his fortification process in Egypt. And this is basically what Babylon would have looked like back in the day. So we have the canal going through the fortress, and the fortress itself alongside the Nile. And the fortress itself was built at around 300 AD, and it's centered around the Trajan's Harbor and Canal, as you can see here. So, so we'll talk first about the outer perimeter of the fortress. So the most impressive part of the outer walls would be the two round towers at the canal's entrance. Then we have the curtain. We have the walls surrounding the fortress, which is around 4 meters thick and 5 meters high. Then at the edge, at the land edge of the wall, there are square towers, which is quite. Actually, wait. Let's talk about this first. And yeah, then we have alongside the walls the U-shaped towers, which has a 22-meter interval from each other, and it projects 14 meters outside of the wall. And yeah, as we can see, the structure of Babylon is actually quite similar to what we see of other Roman fortresses of the same era. And and yeah, so I tried to draw out the area of Fortress Babylon on Google Earth, just to demonstrate how big it is. So I used this graph from Peter Sheehan as a reference. And well, the small difficulty I had when trying to draw out the border was that the northern border of the fortress is basically gone, so nobody can identify it anymore. So well, that's why I just took this graph as a reference. So here we can see the existence of a road which goes all the way to the northeastern edge. So, well, this road is apparently this road here. So yeah, therefore I was able to identify this edge. And since it's a rectangular fortress, then I just extended a 90-degree line here and close it with this existing wall here. And also what's mentioning is the Nile at this time. So as you can see here on the map, there's a metro line running directly in front of the fortress. And basically this was the course of the Nile back in the days of Diocletian. And the Nile goes like this, so which means the southern part of the fortress has dried up already. So that's why during the age of Diocletian, the southern part of the Trajan's Harbor was turned into a gate, which is this one we're seeing here. So yeah, yeah, exactly. So since this part of the Nile has dried up already, naturally it was turned into a gate. So the southern gate was around 3 stories high with brick vaulted internal chambers inside. And it also consists of a pair of double arch gateways, so one pair here, one pair here. And therefore it creates actually like an extra layer of defense. So then basically they have like a so-called killing zone here to prevent the enemy from attacking. And also what's interesting is that on the side of the tower, there's actually a postern gate, which is used for counterattack. So basically when an enemy enters from here, you can attack from here. And the construction technique used for the fortress is something called opus mixtum. So basically it means that, so when you're building a wall, you would use 2 or more rows of bricks alternating with 1 or more rows of stone. So well, basically it means like, so here we can see 3 rows of stone here, bricks. 3 rows of bricks here, 1, 2, 3. And then directly after 3 rows of bricks, we will see 5 rows of limestone, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it goes on and on. So that's basically what opus mixtum is. And the bricks, the red bricks used here, they're actually fire bricks. And it basically decreases the construction's weight while increase the construction's height. So that's why later we will see that the towers of Fortress Babylon were actually quite impressively high for example, the two round towers. So they're located here at the entrance of the canal, and they're around 22 meters away from each other. And the height, as I said, is quite impressive, 17.4 meters tall. And actually, the base of this tower goes actually 16 meters underground, so which makes the total height of the tower actually 33.4 meters. And so the towers are again 3 stories high, just like the southern gate, and it's built around a circular colonnaded space, which is here, which is supported by 8 columns. So we see 1, 2, 3, 4 here, and there will be 4 more on the other side. And actually, interestingly, on the walls, there is actually a very bored niche which contains either a column or a statue, but according to most academics, it's actually a statue. So that's what the niche looks like. It's also not really accessible nowadays. So given the historical background, so certain people, so like some academics, for example, Dmitry Kremlin, he suggested that given the historical context, we would have 2 statues of the Augustus standing here, and 2 statues of the Caesars standing here. So the 2 Augustus, which would be Diocletian and Maximian, and the 2 Caesars, Constantius Chlorus and Galerius. So since the statue or the column is nowhere to be found, we could only guess what they would have looked like, but there are 2 possibilities. So they either wear imperial clothes like the togas, so as this depiction on the Constantine's Ark, or they wear military uniforms, as for example the Tatarki statue at Venice. And well, since the internal layout is completely messed up right now, because it's inside, it's like everything underground under the modern town, so basically there isn't much trace of the original fortress left. But well, we do know that there's the fortress connected by a road which goes from Heliopolis to Memphis, and also extends here to a bridge going to Memphis. And we know that there's, between the south and north gate, there's the Via Praetoria, and between the east and west gate, there's the Via Principalis, and also around the whole fortress, there would be the Via Sigillarius, which makes it convenient for troops to be deployed. And also there's a bridge across the Trajas Canal which connects the fortress. And inside the fortress there are also small roads which would divide the fortress into different insulae. And we don't know what's exactly in every one of the insulae, but we do know that in several insulae there are barracks, and they would have been all around the whole fortress. So the existing barracks we found is the one in front of the Ben Ezra Synagogue, which is like, this barrack is one of the better, relatively well preserved ones. So so basically the barrack is divided into blocks, and within each block there is a vestibule, a small living room, something like this in front, and a 5 times 5 meter chamber, which is for the soldiers to sleep. And in front of between the barracks actually, because here, like at the side of the synagogue, there used to be also barracks. So between the barracks, there's a 2 meter wide passageway, which leads to the stairway to the tower. So the soldiers could just basically get out of their bedroom and be in position right away. So yeah, and this is all about the interior of Babylon, and now we will take a look at the functionalities of the fortress Babylon. So we go back to the question, what role did the fortress play in the Roman governance of Egypt? So since the fortress, of course, first and foremost, we will take a look at the military function of this fortress. So again, we have 2 questions. So first of all, was it necessary for this location to be heavily fortified and defended? And second of all, was its defense sufficient to withstand a massive siege, or it actually wasn't that great? So in order to answer this question, we should actually think from the opponent's perspective. So who are the 2 empires that attacked Egypt during the end of the Roman Empire? The Sassanids, Persians, and the Arabic Empire. So we'll first take a look at the Sassanid conquest of Egypt, which happened in 1980. Unfortunately, the Sassanid conquest is a very badly documented one, so there isn't very much information about how the invasion went. But well, we do know that it started in Palestine, and the first place the Persians conquered was Pelusium, the gateway to Egypt. And right directly after Pelusium, they went to Babylon. They conquered Babylon, and then instead of going south, they went north to Nicaea, this town here. After conquering Nicaea, they went for Alexandria, and they conquered Alexandria in June 619. And after Alexandria, they went all the way south down the Nile, and at the end of the year, they've already reached Aswan, so they conquered whole Egypt after Alexandria. And then, now we can take a look at the Arab conquest. So fortunately, this one is a bit more well documented, so we know exactly how it went. So again, the first step was Pelusium. And the general of this army is called Amr ibn al-As. And so the nature of this initial stage of conquest was actually a bit debated as well, because he brought apparently only 3,500 men. So there's this debate whether he actually acted on the caliph's initiative or his own initiative. So, initially, so basically he just attacked whatever is easy for him to attack, and he reached eventually to Arsinoe, which is the modern day Fayum. So at this point he still has only this very small amount of men, but then apparently he heard that there was a reinforcement coming from Arabia, which consists of 12,000 men under the General Zubair. So instead of trying to conquer Arsinoe, he decided to retreat to Heliopolis to meet with the reinforcement. And together they conquered the city of Heliopolis in July 640 AD, and immediately they launched the siege of Babylon, which lasted for 9 months. So from September 640 to April 641 AD. And afterwards, just like the Persians, they went for Nicaea and Alexandria. So this time they didn't even have to go to south, because after the fall of Alexandria, the Romans officially surrendered Egypt to the Arabs in September 642, right here at Fortress Babylon. So yeah, now we can go back to the first question. So if we imagine, if we look at the conquering route of both armies, so they both captured Babylon before moving to Alexandria, actually directly after conquering Pelusium in a way. So basically, in this sense, they both realized the importance of Babylon in covering the flanks of Alexandria. And second of all, after both armies captured Babylon, they didn't go south, but instead they chose to go north. So, which means, in this case, they feel that by conquering Babylon, they've already, in a way, secured the control of the south, and therefore they could focus their power on capturing Alexandria. So, yeah, for the first question, I would say it's a solid yes. The necessary of this location, it's very necessary for this location to be heavily fortified, as we can see from the invasion routes. And so, now the second question, how good is this fortress in preventing an attack? So now we can take a look at the siege of Babylon. Again, this is a very well documented one, so we know how everything goes. The Roman soldiers that was guarding Babylon, they were basically survivors of the Battle of Heliopolis. So they were in pretty low morale, and they were basically poorly trained local recruits, and their number was actually only 5,000 to 6,000 in comparison to the Arabic force, which is over 10,000. And to make matters worse, the Roman commander-in-chief, Theodorus, he basically fled to Alexandria after the battle, so he was not present on site. And the real command of the fortress was under a person called Cyrus, and he's not a soldier, he's the patriarch of Alexandria. And there's another Roman general called George on site, but yeah, he didn't play such an important role in decision making. So yeah, basically it's a very uneven battle. So we have a very disorganized Roman army, very low in morale, small in number, and we have an Arab army which are under the command of 2 experienced generals, high in morale and double the size. So the siege began in September 640. Well, fortunately, that was exactly when the Nile flooded, so the Arabic assault was delayed. But then the situation in the fortress was not going well, so negotiation actually started already in October between Cyrus and Amr, and they actually came up with a treaty of surrender. So this treaty was basically sent to Constantinople by Cyrus. But in mid-November, after Emperor Heraclius received the treaty, he decided to reject the treaty and order Babylon to keep fighting. So yeah, this news reached Babylon in December, and yeah, the garrison of Babylon would have no choice but to keep fighting. So in December, to make matters worse, diseases started to break out inside the fortress, and the recession of the Nile flooding is started to begin, which means the fortress itself is being more and more exposed to land attacks. And from January to February, the Nile flooding receded completely. So, which means the fortress is now completely exposed to land attack. And also, well, the garrison was actually counting on some reinforcement to come and relieve them, which did not happen because they were being intercepted. So the final blow came in March when the death of Emperor Heraclius reached Babylon, and so no reinforcements is going to come for sure. And finally, on April the 9th, the Arabs launched a final assault on Babylon and captured the fortress. So yeah, even though Babylon fell in the end, but still, it's very impressive that with such a small force, they managed to withstood a 9-month siege against an enemy that's way stronger than them. And the key to this achievement is, of course, on one hand, the strong fortifications that, as we have seen already, but also a very smart idea was the fact that Romans built the fortress directly next to the Nile, and therefore they utilized the Nile as part of its defense, actually. So the flooding of the Nile would provide cover from a land assault, and even after when the flooding receded, the land would be muddy, so it's quite hard to attack from land. So yeah, again, for our second question, yes, Babylon is more than capable of withstanding a prolonged siege, so yeah, it's pretty good fortress actually. And then we go to the administrative and logistical function of the fortress. So Egypt was a province of relative peace by nature. So the garrison in Egypt was not for fighting. It's more for policing and securing domestic stability. So what they would do usually is, for example, border control, maintenance and policing of infrastructures, well, of course, building roads and bridges, and also levying taxes and supplies. So in this case, well, since in most cases there are only 2 or 3 legions in Egypt, and Egypt is apparently a really large place. So this required actually a frequent deployment of soldiers outside of their station area, and in some cases even outside of Egypt itself. So yeah, well, they're usually sent in small detachments and not the whole legion. So yeah, due to the nature of their tasks, there's actually a really high demand on the convenience of transportation. And therefore comes the advantage of Babylon. Since it's located in a very good geographical location, it actually makes transportation and supply shipment very easily, which is why Babylon, ever since its construction, it has become a transportation and logistical center. So, for example, it could house a whole legion on their way of transit, and in the 3rd century, it already became a supply base, and also, and yeah, so basically, by having a fortress here, it could enable a quick deployment of troops throughout the province and to carry out various tasks, doesn't matter if it's civic or military. And yeah, now we can take a look at its economic function. So, well, traditionally, if you want to transport between the Mediterranean and the Nile, including, for example, trading, import and export, you would have to go through this whole process of sea navigation plus desert caravan road and Nile river travel. So basically you will start from one of the Red Sea ports, for example, Berenike or Mios Hormos, and then you would travel alongside one of those desert caravan roads to the Nile, and then go upstream through Nile to the Mediterranean. But the thing is, so this one, so the road from Mios Hormos to Edfu is actually the shortest one of the two desert caravans, but it's still 150 kilometers long, and you have to climb over a 600-meter altitude in the eastern desert, so which would have looked like this, so pretty unpleasant to travel in the ancient times. However, so yeah, then in this case, by opening up a direct canal between the Red Sea and the Nile, it would have saved a lot of time and effort. But still, we need to know that the opening of the Trajan's Canal did not replace these caravan roads. Why? Because the water level of the canal is actually affected by the Nile's annual flooding. So basically, you need the Nile's flood to make the canal's water level rise to a navigable level for the ship to pass through. So which means the navigability of the canal is actually only seasonal from July to November, and therefore it actually created what we call a one-way scenario. So let's say if you want to import goods from Rome to India and come back again, so you need to do it during the Nile flooding season, which is from July to November. Then you can use the Trajan's Canal, which is good because it will only take you 2-3 days to get to the Red Sea. And then you take the monsoon, which goes from June to September to India. And then we come back following the monsoon on January. You take once again the caravan road up to the Nile and then come back to Rome. So yes, in this case, the canal did not replace the caravan road, but nevertheless, it improved the convenience of logistics, and it saved valuable transportation costs, for example, the customs tariffs, because instead of going through instead of going through 4 customs districts, now the improved version is you go only through 3. So yeah, and of course we have historical record that indicates the frequent use of this canal, because for example, we have a document that says in the winter of 524 AD, at the port of Adulis in Aksum, which is modern Eritrea, there are 60 ships in total docked in the harbor, and actually 20 of them were from Clisma, which transported through the Trajan's Canal, while only 2 were from Berenike. So like here, of course, I'm not saying that the port of Clisma has replaced Berenike in its importance, or that the canal is more important than the caravan road. But what I'm simply saying here is that there are actually a lot of merchant ships that was actively using Trajan's Canal, despite its seasonal navigability. And yeah, of course, there are more, of course, Fortress Babylon, as well as, yes, it does not extract only customs tariffs, because we do have also a papyrus record that says if you're traveling through this fortress, you would also have to pay taxes, which you can see from here. So, and in Babylon, this person, he paid on the 21st year 45 drachms and 2 obels, and he did this for the next year as well. So basically, I didn't take a look at, I didn't get the information of every single type of taxes that's being collected in this fortress, but at least it's safe to say that more than 2 forms of taxes are being collected, and there will of course be even more forms of taxes. And therefore, my conclusion is that the economic function of Babylon might have been underestimated, and that it actually played a quite important role in maintaining the economy of Roman Egypt. And of course, after Christianization of Egypt, Babylon also played a relatively minor religious function within Egypt. So, we know that just like most of the Roman legionary camps, a town would develop around it, just like, for example, in Strasbourg, Vienna, and this happened in Babylon as well. So by the late antiquity, Babylon has already grown into a medium-sized town, at least up until the time of the Arab conquest. And therefore, after Christianization, a bishopric, so a place with a bishop, was formed actually in Babylon. And we know of its existence because in church records we have a Kyros, Bishop of Babylon, attending the Council of Ephesus at the year 449. So at least we know that before the year 449, Babylon was already a bishopric. And of course, when we look at the Vatican record as well, it also recorded the existence of the bishopric of Babylon. But however, it's currently listed as a titular see, so basically it's like a dead see, no longer used. But still, within Egypt, Babylon played a quite important religious role after Christianization. So as I mentioned before, the canal, we found part of the canal underneath this church, the Abu Serga church. The official name is actually called St. Sergius and Bacchus Church. So it's dedicated to the martyrs St. Sergius and Bacchus. And it was built directly at the center of the fortress, and it was the oldest church in Egypt, so in 5th century. And it housed, of course, parts of the relics of the martyrs and the other parts in Syria. And also, more importantly, here there's also the crypt of the Holy Family. So it is said that the Holy Family stayed in this crypt for 3 weeks while they were exiling in Egypt. So for me, in my opinion, I think, well, if this crypt is true, if it's true that the Holy Family really stayed 3 weeks here during the exile in Egypt, that's actually a further indication that the Augustine legionary camp is actually located on the elevated grounds instead of here, because apparently the Holy Family would not have been hiding inside a Roman legionary camp. So yeah, and so of course, since this is a very important holy site, it would have attracted a lot of pilgrimage here, and which further improved the urban development of Babylon. And also, it's also imaginable that during a battle, since the Roman army was mostly Christians, such a site would have boosted the morale of the defending army. And of course, the existence of this church, it also played a role in the future development of Cairo, because it transformed the area of the fortress, which is Old Cairo, into the Christian and Jewish quarter of the city. So yeah, now we go only briefly into the fortress Babylon's influence on Cairo becoming the later Egyptian capital. So basically after conquest, so we have here, there's the fortress Babylon. It eventually became, as I said, the Christian and Jewish quarter of Cairo. And outside of Babylon, so where the Arab siege camp is, it eventually turned into the first mosque in Cairo, the Amr ibn al-As mosque. And together, they formed the Old Cairo, or Al-Fustat. And so in the later days, Cairo basically developed northwards along this axis of the fortress and the mosque. And so this is still during its early stage, and this is during the middle stage of medieval. And of course, in general, the city developed not just directly north, but also northwest, northeast. For example, the modern center of Cairo, the Al Tahrir Square, it developed more towards the northwest. So yeah, the fortress itself also laid a solid foundation for the future development of Cairo. And also, well, if you look at it from a macro perspective, so Cairo, the fortress Babylon also played a role in the fact that to shift the power as the provincial capital, or the capital of the country, shifted from Alexandria to Cairo. So these are some reasons I listed. So first of all, it's more defensible from invasions due to the change of external threats. And second of all, after the Arab conquest of Egypt, the shift of focus turned from the Mediterranean to the Middle East and North Africa. And also, since the area of Babylon is traditionally the seat of power, which is around Memphis and Heliopolis. So by making Cairo the capital, it's simply indicating that Egypt returned to its traditional seat of power around Memphis and Heliopolis. So for the first point, well, this is basically all the invasions that Egypt had, not all of them, but some of the major invasions that Egypt faced after the Arab conquest. So, well, actually, ironically, the first invasion came from the Roman Empire. So yeah, and as we can see, all of these invasions were concentrated on the northern coast. So let's say if Alexandria is still the capital, then, well, in case bad things happened, the capital would be in a very imminent danger. Whereas Cairo, well, it at least provided a bit of depth, so yeah, it's relatively safer. And also shift the focus. So back in the Roman Empire, of course, Egypt would have had a more close connection with, for example, Rome, Constantinople, or any other places in the Roman Empire around the Mediterranean. But however, after Arab conquest, so Egypt would have been on the other side, would have been enemies with, of course, Eastern Roman Empire and the various Christian kingdoms here. So yeah, naturally the connection between Egypt and, let's say, North Africa, Syria, Mesopotamia, and Arabia would have been strengthened. So this connection replaced Egypt's connection with the Mediterranean world, and therefore, since Cairo, well, of course, due to its it has a Roman foundation, but it's mainly developed as an Islamic city. So it would also make more sense for the shift of power to go from a Greco-Roman city to an Islamic city. And also, yeah, as we've said, Memphis used to be the capital of ancient Egypt, and Heliopolis was the main coast center of ancient Egypt. So this area has always been a quite important area in Egypt. Well, let's say the seat of power since the beginning of civilization in Egypt. So basically, yeah, now that Cairo is again the capital of Egypt, it's simply a return to this traditional seat of power. And in the end, so my conclusion for this thesis is that, well, again, due to the peaceful status of Egypt, the effective control of the province by Romans should be done with the minimum amount of manpower, because of course you should use your valuable troops on frontiers instead of guarding a peaceful province. So in this way, Babylon did a very good job, because first of all, its location controlled basically the choke point of Upper and Lower Egypt, and also the non-Red Sea. So by putting a fortress at this location, it ensured the effective control of the whole Egypt and the rapid deployment of troops and resources for whatever civic and military purposes. And also it functioned as a regulation of trade and travel, because as we can see, there's a lot of taxes being imposed on travelers and merchants. So yeah, it also generates a lucrative amount of tax. And also, due to its strong fortification, it also succeeded in defending this strategic point with only limited amount of manpower, as we can see from the Arab siege of Babylon. So yeah, it formed actually a very important line of defense in front of Alexandria, so that whatever invasion force comes, it cannot just go directly to Alexandria. And as again seen in the siege of Babylon, it's capable of delaying the enemy force for a sufficient amount of time. Even though in that case, unfortunately, reinforcements never came, but if they came, would have made a difference. So yeah, among all the fortresses in Egypt, I will say Babylon is perhaps the most important one of them. And the existence of Babylon as a fortress was actually quite essential for the effective Roman governance of Egypt, and which is exactly why the Romans rose Babylon to an ever higher status than any of its predecessors. And this decision is actually acknowledged by the Arab successors of Roman Egypt, since Cairo is now the capital of Egypt. And in the end, I want to, well, first mention that this YouTube video is actually where I got my idea from. And also I want to thank my parents for accompanying me to Egypt and visit the place myself, and it was a really wonderful trip, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, that's all. Thanks for watching.
Ja, wunderbar. Vielen Dank für diese